Have you ever wondered how a city could transform into a battlefield overnight? Imagine waking up to the sound of gunfire instead of alarm clocks, military tanks instead of traffic. This was the harsh reality of Marawi, a city in the Philippines, in the spring of 2017. A peaceful city, suddenly caught in the crossfire of a conflict that would last for 5 grueling months. The Siege of Marawi, as it came to be known. In the next few minutes, we will unravel the events of the Siege of Marawi. It all began on the 23rd of May 2017. The city of Marawi, a jewel in the heart of the Philippine island of Mindanao, was on the brink of a catastrophe. It was on this day that the Maute group and Abu Sayyaf, 2 militant organizations pledging allegiance to the Islamic State, brazenly took control of several city landmarks. The audacity of their actions sent shockwaves across the country and beyond. Their initial targets were key: the city hall, the main police station, a college, a hospital, a jail, and part of the commercial district all fell under their control. The militants, emboldened by their early successes, raised the black flag of ISIS over these buildings. The message was clear: they were not merely rebels, they were a force to be reckoned with. The Philippine government, taken aback by the audaciousness of these actions, responded with swift and stern measures. President Rodrigo Duterte, who was on an official visit to Russia at the time, cut his trip short to address the crisis. He declared martial law over the entire island of Mindanao. An island home to more than 20 million people was now under military rule. The government's response was a clear signal of its intent to regain control and restore peace. But the declaration of martial law was not without controversy. Critics feared potential human rights abuses under military rule. Supporters, however, argued that the extraordinary circumstances demanded extraordinary measures. Meanwhile, the residents of Marawi found themselves in the middle of a war zone. Thousands began to flee, leaving behind their homes, their livelihoods, and their city. The serene landscape of Marawi was about to be transformed into a battlefield, a stark contrast to its peaceful past. This marked the beginning of a violent and destructive conflict. In the following weeks, the situation escalated rapidly. The Siege of Marawi was no longer a sporadic clash but a full-scale urban war that was causing devastation beyond imagining. The city, once bustling with life, was now a battleground where the sound of gunfire and explosions echoed day and night. As the combat intensified, the city's infrastructure crumbled under the weight of the conflict. Buildings that once stood as symbols of Marawi's vibrant culture and history were reduced to rubble, their remnants a stark reminder of the violence that had enveloped the city. Hospitals, schools, and homes were not spared, leaving a city scarred and its inhabitants in despair. The human toll was equally, if not more, devastating. The escalating conflict led to a significant increase in casualties. Men, women, and children were caught in the crossfire, their lives forever altered by the conflict. Every day the list of the wounded and the dead grew longer, a tragic testament to the brutality of the siege. The violence also triggered a massive displacement of residents. Thousands of families were forced to leave their homes, carrying with them only the bare necessities and the hope of returning someday. The once lively streets of Marawi were now deserted, save for the armed forces and the militants, locked in an endless struggle. The city's economy too took a severe hit. With businesses shut down and livelihoods destroyed, an acute financial crisis was unfolding. The bustling markets were abandoned, and the city's once thriving commerce was now a distant memory. The city was in chaos, and there seemed to be no end in sight. The Siege of Marawi was not just a military confrontation, it was a humanitarian crisis, a cultural tragedy, and a social catastrophe, all rolled into one. The escalating conflict was tearing apart the fabric of Marawi, leaving behind a city and a people in ruins. But every conflict has its turning point, and for the Siege of Marawi, it came in late July. The Maute group, a radical Islamist faction, had held the city in a stranglehold for months. Their leaders, brothers Omar and Abdullah Maute, were the driving force behind the insurgency, their influence and strategic planning keeping the militants' morale high, and their control over the city strong. But as the Philippine military continued to apply pressure, their luck began to run out. The turning point came in the form of a strategic military operation. It was a covert mission, carried out under the cover of darkness, aimed at taking out the top brass of the Maute group. In the early hours of a late July day, the operation was carried out with clinical precision. The brothers, who had been the architects of the siege, were killed. It was a significant blow to the group, a decapitation of the snake, so to speak. Their demise was a crucial turning point in the siege, marking the beginning of the end of the Maute group's reign of terror over Marawi. Their death sent shockwaves through the ranks of the militants. The Maute group, once a formidable force, was suddenly without its leaders. The power structure began to crumble. The militants' control over the city started to wane. Military operations continued, and the Philippine forces, sensing the shift in power, pressed their advantage. They began to reclaim the city block by block, building by building. The morale of the militants plummeted, their resistance weakened. The once fearsome Maute group was now a shadow of its former self, its grip on the city slipping away. The loss of their leaders was a fatal blow to their cause, a blow from which they would never recover. The balance of power had shifted, the momentum had swung in favor of the Philippine military. With the leaders gone, the tide began to turn. Finally, after 5 months of conflict, the siege came to an end. It was October, a time when the air should have been filled with the festive spirit of the Maranao people. But instead, it was a time of relief, of sorrow, of picking up the pieces. The siege of Marawi, a 5-month-long armed conflict, left the city in ruins. Thousands of homes were reduced to rubble, lives were lost, and an entire city was left to mourn. The casualties were numerous, both military and civilian, each one a heartbreaking testament to the horrors of war. The city, once vibrant and bustling, now lay silent, a ghost town echoing with the memories of its former glory. But the impact of the siege extended beyond the physical destruction. It displaced thousands of Marawi's residents, forcing them to leave behind their homes, their livelihoods, and their cherished city. These people sought refuge in other parts of the Philippines, living with the uncertainty of when or if they could return home. In the wake of the devastation, the government stepped in, promising to rebuild and rehabilitate Marawi. Efforts were made to clear the city of unexploded ordnance and begin the arduous process of rebuilding. The government pledged support for the displaced residents, promising financial aid and assistance in finding new homes. But the scars of war run deep. The physical reconstruction of Marawi is just one part of the recovery process. The psychological and emotional healing of its people, the rebuilding of their lives and their sense of community, that is a far more complex task. The Siege of Marawi was not just an event in history, it was a tragedy that touched the lives of thousands of people. It changed the city of Marawi and its people forever. The city's recovery is a testament to the resilience of its people and a reminder of the human cost of conflict. The Siege of Marawi left a deep and lasting impact on the city and its people. The Siege of Marawi wasn't just a local conflict, it had far-reaching implications. The 5-month-long battle not only devastated the city, but it also brought to the forefront the grim reality of the rise of ISIS in Southeast Asia. This marked a new chapter in the region's history, a chapter that the international community could no longer ignore. The siege revealed the vulnerability of the region to the infiltration and influence of international terrorist groups. The Philippines, a nation known for its vibrant culture and warm hospitality, was suddenly thrust onto the world stage not for its tropical beauty, but for a battle against a dark force that threatened to destabilize the region. The lessons from the siege were many. It highlighted the importance of intelligence gathering and the need for a robust and responsive military and police force. In response, the Philippine government launched a massive rehabilitation program and beefed up its security measures, marking a significant shift in the country's approach to tackling terrorism. The siege also underscored the resilience and unity of the Filipino people. Their collective spirit in the face of adversity served as a beacon of hope for a nation in recovery. The Siege of Marawi serves as a stark reminder of the devastating effects of conflict and the importance of maintaining peace. In a world that is increasingly interconnected, it is a lesson that resonates beyond the borders of the Philippines, echoing across the globe.